City University Television. In association with the Center for Advanced Study in Theater Arts. And the Clurman Endowment. Presents Spotlight.
Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Ed Wilson, and my guest is the producer of some of America's best-known musicals, including Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, My Fair Lady, and many others, Mr. Herman Levin. Herman, welcome.
Thank you, Ed.
I want to talk to you about some of these famous musicals that you produced, but first, I want to talk to you about you a little bit. You did not start out to be a theater producer, did you?
No, I started out actually as a lawyer. I came to New York to go to law school at night and work during the daytime. And then when I became a lawyer, because I had a great interest in the theater, that was my avocation. I used to go to, as a kid in Philadelphia, there had 10 theaters there at the time, legitimate theaters.
Right.
And I used to go see everything. I don't think I knew there were critics, by the way. I just thought they had shows and you went to them, you know. You went down and gave them $1 and you got a seat in the second balcony. And so I just loved the theater. I started to read Variety. I thought that was you keep up on the news of the world that way.
And that was the news of the world.
Yeah, and I got to, when I became a lawyer and began to practice, my practice was either had to do with the theater or entertainment or people who were in that field, and thus I drifted into.
Well, now, your first show was Call Me Mister, is that right?
That's right.
In 1946.
Yeah, it opened in 46. What happened was that Arnold Auerbach wrote the sketches, and Harold Rome, who was a client of mine, wrote the music and lyrics. And I started to try to get a producer for them. And I remember I got Billy Rose up there, and 10 or 12, Herman Shumlin, I remember bringing over there. Harold then lived at a very convenient, beautiful apartment at 11 West 57th Street, which is now part of a big office building site. In any case, nobody wanted to do it. So one day we were sitting around, the three of us, and I said very kind of hesitantly, well, I've always really wanted to, and I finally came out, I said, I'll produce it. And they said, can you raise the money? I said, yes. I said, how do you know? I said, we'll find out. So, and oddly enough, we got the money, the budget was $150,000, and we had 3 auditions. And that was it.
And you got the whole $150,000 in 3 auditions?
Yeah.
How many backers did you have?
Oh, not too many. I would guess now about 25 or 30. One of them was Dorothy Schiff, who owned the Post, the New York Post, and she put up $25,000. So that ate
helped.
Into it, you know.
But now this was a musical about being Call Me Mister. It's guys who've gotten out of the army.
Yes, it was about being in the armed services and getting out of the armed services. And one of matter of fact, the song I think that closed the first act was Call Me. It was a song called Call Me Mister, and it was Call Me Mister from now on.
From now on, right.
And that became the title song. And it was quite a hit. And
well, there was one song in that was an enormous hit. There were a lot of sketches and songs, and that was Betty Garrett sang a song called South America, Take It Away.
Which had nothing to do with the services.
Was it just,
may I tell you how that,
how did it came
about?
Yes.
We opened in New Haven. In those days, you opened in New Haven, you did four performances. You opened on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, Saturday matinee and evening. And it became obvious in the dress rehearsal up there, probably on the Tuesday night or Wednesday night, that we had to have a number in front of the curtain, a number in 1, because we couldn't make the change into the next scene.
You needed something to cover a scene
a scene change. And so Harold and I were standing in the back, and he said, well, how about the South America, which was a number he had written 2 or 3 years before.
For something else?
And for something, no, just as a song, you know. So I said, well, Harold, how does that fit in? It's got nothing. He says, well, we'll have a soldier, a sailor. I said, it doesn't really fit into the theme. Anyway, the number went in, And it was in this was in the first act. So it stopped the show. Harold and I were standing in the back, and it stopped the show cold. And I turned to him and said, "Shake hands with an idiot." I said, you know. And then we said, now, how can we put this number at about 11:15, which is a traditional spot for a show-stopping tune? And we did find a way of moving it. Once we had that number, we could make other changes. And then we went from there to Philadelphia, then to Baltimore, and then New York.
Yeah, and it was a big hit.
It was indeed.
So you started off...
you know, an odd thing is, well, yeah, I was very lucky.
Yeah,
It may very well have been that if the first show having done a hit, I always could look back on that and say to myself, well, you did it once, you know.
Sure.
But I imagine it's very tough to do a second show if the first one is a flop. You know, I just want to tell you something. Yeah. An interesting thing, odd thing about that show was the road company. Let me tell you who were members of the road company, in no particular order.
Yes.
Bob Fosse, Buddy Hackett, Carl Reiner, William Warfield.
That's an incredible lineup.
That's a pretty good. I think their total salaries were about $700 a week.
For all of them put together.
Put together, yeah.
And of course, they all became huge stars.
Yes, they did. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, now your next show, because you hit one too. Your next one was Gentlemen Prefer.
No, I can't take credit
really?
for being that. The next show was provided an opportunity for Oliver Smith and I to meet, and we became very dear friends, as we are to this day. And we also produced a hit together, but it was an agent by the name of Debbie Coleman. And she came to me and said that Oliver Smith, whom I knew as a scenic designer, and also as the producer of On the Town, had this play. And it was by a Frenchman called Jean-Paul Sartre. And John Huston was going to direct it. And they had Annabella, Ruth Ford, and Claude Dauphin. Everything was, the only thing is couldn't get the money. So I said, I'd like to see him. So Oliver and I met, and I said, well, gee, I'll be glad. Well, I helped to raise them. In other words, I raised most of the money pretty quickly. Can you imagine? We did that show for $35,000. You can't get a ticket for $35,000.
What was the show?
Oh, it was No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre.
Which has, of course, become a famous classic.
But it was not a hit. You know what I mean?
I'm sure.
It was one of succès d'estime.
Exactly. But it's still a text. People still study it and produce it, actually.
Yeah. And
it was not a Broadway.
No. I think we shouldn't have done it until about a year ago. You know what I mean?
And then
we might have had a chance today. But we did win some kind of critics award for the best foreign play of the year and so forth, but that was it.
But then you did Gentlemen Prefer
Blondes.
Then
Oliver and I did Gentlemen Prefer Blondes.
How did that come about?
Well, I had gone to Europe for the first time in my life, and I was coming back on the Queen Elizabeth, I guess it was, and I met a fellow whom I knew slightly by the name of Jack Robbins, who was a music publisher and a very successful music publisher. And he and I had lunch or meals together, and we were walking around the deck one day, and he said to me, you know, make a good musical? Anita Luce's book, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Well, you know, it's almost impossible if you're in the business to go a day without somebody not saying, you know, make a good musical. This my cousin, you know, and tell you a story about how his father, you know, what a great success he is and all that. In any case, it didn't hit me till about a couple hours later, and then I got a hold of him. I said, you know, that is a good idea. He said, I know Anita Luce. He said, I'll introduce you to her. So I said, well, where does she live? He says, the Plaza Hotel. So I said, I'll call her and I'll mention your name. He said, fine. And then I took her to lunch, and that's how that got started. Oh, and then Oliver and I had gotten along together, and he had certain contacts that I thought would be very useful too. I'm speaking now as a selfish person. In addition to knowing him and liking him and admiring his taste, there were many reasons, so we became partners, and we did that.
Well, now, that had, because Julie Stein wrote the music to that.
Yes. Now, Julie Stein was suggested by, no, I knew Julie Stein. Yes. I had met him and Sammy Kahn before that. And, but one of the things that I said to Jack Brown, I said, listen, why don't you contact Julie Stein and Leo Robin, who was a great popular song lyricist. And they came together, and then he became the publisher for that score,
Right.
so that he had some commercial interest in the proposition.
Well, it had some wonderful. It had Bye Bye Baby,
Right.
and Little Girl from Little Rock, and of course Diamonds Are a
Diamonds,
Girl's
yeah.
Best Friend. And that it introduced Carol Channing. Now, how did that happen? How did she come to be? Because she was not a star when she went into this show.
No.
And
Now,
she
matter
was-
of fact, we didn't star her in the beginning. We did later. What happened was that she was in a show called Lend an Ear. A little review, which,
Right.
well, a review, it wasn't
Had
that
the
little.
Gladiola girl in it. or
That's
something.
right, in which she played a 1920s
Flapper.
flapper type. And Anita called me and said that we ought to go see it, and I said fine. So Anita, I took Anita to see the show, and Gower Champion, by the way, directed that show, and I think that was his first show he ever directed on Broadway, maybe any place. In any case, that's how it got started. We arranged for her to. We had Stein and Robin and John C. Wilson by then had agreed to direct the show, and then they went to see her, and then we all met her up at Jack Wilson's office, and it was after about 2 minutes, everybody was just delighted because we had auditioned some of the most famous blondes in the world before that, movie stars or soon-to-be movie stars or recent movie stars, but we never got any spark of any kind from any of them.
And with Carol Channing, you did.
Oh, immediately.
And of course, then
But she knew. See, she knew she was doing a caricature. The
Yes.
others, I suspect, thought that they were going to be seductive and adorable girls, and she knew that what you needed was somebody who was going to caricature.
who gave it a little edge. and a
That's
little-
right, and that's what made it funny.
And so then when she opened, she was immediately recognized by the critics and everybody, wasn't she?
Oh, she got great notices.
Yes.
The show got great notices.
And so then you gave her star billing then?
Yeah, well, the theory in those days used to be that you didn't star somebody until the critics and the public demanded it not articulately that way, but there was an indication
a
that
groundswell.
they regarded her as a
Right,
star.
right.
And of course, then that increased the selling power of the show as well as increased her stature, which she well deserved.
Herman, let's come now to My Fair Lady. How did that evolve, and how did you get involved in that?
Well,
Because, of course, many people feel it's the best musical of all time, but certainly one of the two or three, no question about it.
I think it's the best.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm just trying to be...
I know you're not. There was a fellow who was a friend of Alan Lerner's and some kind of a manager agent. His legal status I never knew, and he came to see me on the 1st of January. He called me of 1954 and said he wanted to talk to me about something. So he came over and he told me that Lerner was working on another show. It was Little Abner.
All right.
And so I said that he asked if I wanted to produce it, and I said I knew Cap very well. I knew it. I said, well, I think so, and let's get going on it and see what happens. And so we got started, but months and months went by and nothing happened until August. At the end of August, I was in Europe again, and I was having lunch in London with a fellow called Jack Hilton, who was a very prominent producer, especially of musicals, and he had been a band leader in his youth and was kind of the Paul Whiteman of England.
Right.
And he and I were very close friends. We never did a nickel's worth of business together, but we were very good friends. And he told me that it's too bad about the Little Abner project, and I made out I knew what he was talking about. He told me that Lerner wasn't working on it anymore.
Oh. And that's how you heard?
That's how I heard about it.
Yeah.
So I went back to the hotel and I called Lerner, and then discovered he was in California. And he said, "Listen, I didn't even know where you were." He said, "But I've dropped that, and Fritz and I have got a better idea, and I'm even going to tell you what it is. You'll find a letter on your desk when you get back to New York." And the idea was to make a musical out of Pygmalion. Now that, oddly enough, during that month of August, I had been on a yacht that Sam Spiegel had, and Noel Coward was on it. And while I was lying there just sunning myself, and they were talking about doing a musical based on Pygmalion. Now that wasn't the first I'd heard about it.
Yes.
It had been announced as being done by Gabriel Pascal about 3 years before that. Now what happened was, and this makes it very difficult for him to produce it, he died, you see. So it was kind of up for grabs. And then I just was thrilled. And by the time I came back, they had written 2 or 3 songs.
Oh, they had?
Yeah. I can't remember which, except that 1 or 3, I think, and one of them was never used. If it did, it wasn't used in that. In any case, that's how we got rolling on the whole idea.
And so then did they then proceed? You told them right away you wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And then they wrote the rest of the score.
Well, they started to write the score. And simultaneously, I was busy going to London every month or so to make the arrangements to acquire the rights from the Shaw estate.
Which was probably not easy.
Well, it wasn't all that difficult.
Yeah.
They were reasonable. As it turned out, they were very reasonable. You know, if they had known what they knew then, you know, if they knew then what they knew now, it would have been a lot tougher, I guess. No, they got.
Well, now what about Rex Harrison and Julie Andrews and picking them to be in the show?
Well, one day we were sitting in my office, and this was probably in January of '55. And there was like a lot of things going on, and like at the meantime, Oliver Smith had agreed to do the sets, and Moss.
Had Moss Art already been set up?
No, he wasn't set up. He wasn't
the director.
He hadn't been set. You'd be amazed at the people who turned down the direction.
Really?
John Van Druten. He had just done The King and I,
yeah.
And I'm not sure that it would have been any worse or any better if he had done it. Gower Champion, Cyril Ritchard, Noel Coward.
All turned down.
All turned it down for various reasons. I'm not saying you see how stupid they were and how smart we were. That's not my point. The point is that things conspire to somehow, if you're lucky, every move if you're with a real hit, every move you make is the right move, and you find it out later. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It isn't that you're such a big genius.
With hindsight, you're brilliant.
Oh, listen, everybody can, you know.
Well, now tell me about Rex Harrison and Julie Andrews.
Alan said to me, why don't I call Rex? I didn't know him, and he did. And he called him. He got him in Portofino, as a matter of fact, I remember. And he said he was interested. Well, then I started to talk to his agent, who was MCA, a man who is still over there, Lawrence Evans. I read a reference to him recently. He's still with MCA over there. I believe he's still with MCA. Did you ever meet him, Lawrence Evans?
No.
Very tall, distinguished-looking gentleman. Julie was playing in a show here, which was lucky for us.
Is that the boyfriend?
The boyfriend. So we all went to see her. Bob Coote was suggested by Rex.
Right.
I'm going to take a little personal bow here.
Right.
Stanley Holloway was suggested by me.
Was he really?
Yeah. And Kathleen Nesbitt was suggested by me. I remember Moss Moss is now with the project. And he thought, well, he's a small part, and all of them should get a lot of money. I said, I don't care. You know, let's get her if we can.
Sure.
You know?
All those people made a difference, though.
Yeah.
I mean.
Stanley I had seen and have remembered particularly from a picture called The Lavender Hill Mob.
Right.
You remember that with Alec Guinness?
Yes, a movie.
And he was playing the Cockney in that. And I didn't even realize that he had had a big career as a singing comedian in music halls.
But of course, his 2 songs, "Get Me to the Church on Time" and "With a Little Bit of Luck," were 2 of the big...
2 of the big scenes in the show.
Big scenes in the show.
But
well, now tell me about Rex, because here you had Rex Harrison, who had never been in a musical before, and Julie Andrews, who had been in The Boyfriend, but was certainly not a big star at all at that point.
Yeah.
How did that work out in rehearsals, and were there some sort of moments when there were questions about whether either one or the other was going to work out?
You know, I've heard those stories, but I never knew them at the time.
I'm asking you for
I
the
know
story.
You're right. I have heard the whole story about Rex, not Rex, but Julie, that at one point everybody said that she's never going to make it. I never heard that, and it was not my job to be at the rehearsals. That was Moss's job and a lot of other people's jobs.
But you would have been aware of it.
Oh, I would have known about it. I mean,
so
after all, at some point, I'd have to sign a contract.
So as far as you know, everything really was working well in the rehearsal.
I'll tell you one thing, oddly enough. There was a point at which Fritz Lowe and Alan Lerner began to think that Stanley wasn't right. And I didn't see it at all. And they said they wanted to look at somebody else. And so I got a hold of this man whose name, I hate this, I'm not sure of the name, so I don't want to malign anybody, even by error, you know. Certainly not by intention. And we auditioned him at the Hellinger Theater one afternoon. And they came out and they said, well, you know, let's go on with Stanley.
They were convinced.
They were convinced, yeah.
Do you know that I was, Herman, I don't know whether I've ever told you this or not, but I was in New Haven. I was at the Yale Drama School at the time. Of that very first night that anybody ever saw My Fair Lady.
It was a Saturday night.
Saturday night.
Pouring snow, sleet,
I
rain.
got the ticket at 7:45 and went in, and of course the show didn't go up for about 40 minutes or something that first night.
Yeah, and didn't come down until about 1:30 in the morning.
That's right.
Yeah.
But
you knew it was a hit, didn't you?
Absolutely. Well, I never will forget, they were completely, and I want to ask you if you all were surprised. I remember the rain in Spain.
Yeah.
I think they must have assumed it was going to be a throwaway number because they finished it and the place went wild and they got up ready to continue and had to sit back on the sofa, and then they got up and wanted to go on.
I don't think anybody realized that number was going to be so winning and so, you know, conducive to good feeling as it was. It was, after all, you know, a triumph of the character as well as of the performer. So that,
were there any other surprises in terms of numbers that did work or didn't work?
Yeah, there was. There was, you know, the scene, the drawing room scene, when she comes down the staircase in the final product. She comes down the staircase in her gown.
Ready to go to the ball.
Ready to go to the ball. There's a whole scene, precedes that, between Higgins and Pickering. That doesn't exist in Shaw. That's pure Alan Lerner. And I think it's excellent Shaw as well as excellent Lerner.
Yes, it is.
There was a number in there called Come to the Ball, in which the servants sang it and danced and brought her clothes out and dressed her and all that. And it was Come to the Boar is what it turned out to be. And they used that number, though, in Gigi.
In Gigi,
yeah.
Yes. But you all realized you had to take it out of this.
And by the time we opened in Philadelphia the following week, they had Alan had finished the scene.
Right. And then, now, were there any other changes before you came into New York?
There was a minor, really minor. Yeah. I don't.
Did you know then that I mean, you had no idea, I'm sure, that it was going to be a hit of the proportions it was, did you? Or can you tell me?
I don't think, you know, you don't. You feel that you better not give yourself such a curse, you know what I mean?
Right.
Is to assume that it was going to be. But we knew it was a success.
You knew it was going to be.
It would have been
At what
impossible.
point did you realize it was going to be a sort of really a precedent-setting musical and really going to stand above so many others?
Well, I think that was pretty quick.
After it opened
happened
in New
very
York?
quickly, yeah. You know, we opened on the 15th of March. On the 16th, if you look up the records, it was a terrible, stormy night, one of those late winter storms.
Yes.
They called me from the theater. They said, you won't believe this. We've had to call the precinct. We're mobbed with people who've assumed that we'll have returns and that there'll be tickets available. And not a one, you know, and they couldn't get them out of the lobby.
Well, then you knew that you knew that.
Yeah,
you
well,
had
then it was... now, I was going to say this, you know, when they talk about advance sales, you know, our top was $8.
For My Fair Lady.
Yeah.
What did it cost to produce the show?
Roughly $401,000.
$401,000.
Yeah.
What would it cost today? $7 million? Maybe?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe
Like
12.
Yeah.
Don't forget, we had 22 dancers and 16 singers. And then we had the principals.
And a full orchestra.
And an orchestra of 26. Now they have, you know, somebody plays a kazoo, and a couple of relatives dance in the chorus, and that's it, you know. I mean, you can't do it. They don't do shows today with a... Listen, Call Me Mister, the first show had a chorus of 32.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It was 16 dancers and 16 singers was like standard, you know. That was it. That you started from that, you know.
Went on from there.
But now when you put that number of people in, you have to costume those people, and you have to repay them full, at least minimum pay for rehearsal. your rehearsal costs become enormous, you know what I mean? I think that's one of the main reasons for
now, My Fair Lady ran for what,
almost 6.5.
6.5 years.
Yeah.
And then, now, the London opening, was it a big success?
Oh, it was a big success artistically.
Yes.
And financially,
But
as big as New York.
But I hear
the critics weren't that good.
The critics were not.
No.
But it didn't slow it down at all.
Not a bit.
Why do you think the critics were critical of it in London?
I think that they didn't like the idea that a bunch of Americans had taken Shaw and done this marvelous musical. And I don't think there's any two ways about it. It was pure anti-Americanism, in my opinion. You know.
And did they really come down hard on it?
No, they didn't have the guts to do that. But they were carping. Very, very, the notices were grudging, you know. And, you know, there was a press conference there. You know, Binky Beaumont was my co-producer over there. And he was at the time, and had been for many years, the leading producer and one of the top theater owners. He was the Schubert's rolled into one, you might say.
Herman, we don't have much time.
Yeah.
What you were going to say about Binky Beaumont? What was he at this press conference you had?
Yeah, this was some months before
Yeah.
we opened. And their questions to me were the similar questions, like
Right.
pretty much, you must have a lot of guts to come over and do a musical based on Shaw, you know.
Well, in the end, you triumphed in more ways.
Yes,
than
we got the best of them, I think.
after it was all over.
Yeah.
Herman, thank you so much for being with me. This has been very instructive, and it's been delightful having you. This has been Spotlight, and my guest has been Herman Levin. Thank you for being with us.
May I say that?